Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, social marketers around the world. My name is Christine Jennings, and it is both my privilege and pleasure to introduce the 45th in a series of webinars designed to advance social marketing teaching, research, and practice. We'll begin in just a minute, but before we do, I'd like to share brief information about the International Social Marketing Association, since we're welcoming both ISMA members and people who may be unaware of our professional association. ISMA is a federation of individuals and regional member associations. When you join ISMA, you automatically become a member of your regional association as well. So you get the benefit of international-based resources and information relevant to your region. Together, we advance behavior change for social good. Our members are change agents from all sectors, from behavioral scientists and researchers, psychologists, environmental educators, health communicators, academics, practitioners, and students. Anyone eager to learn new tools to change behavior will benefit from becoming a member. Your membership includes access to resources such as online training, professional journals, conference discounts, and our webinar archive of recorded webinars like today's. If you're not already a member, please visit the ISMA website to join. I'm here today with our webinar moderator, Catherine Sadler, our technical host, Dave Cutter, and today's speaker, Joan Young. Catherine and I have worked to arrange today's webinar and will manage any questions you may have for Joan at the end of her presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and will soon be available in our archive. ISMA members have access to that archive, which includes records of all of our previous webinars going back several years on a variety of different topics. We encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook to stay updated about webinars we'll be planning for the rest of the year. Finally, as you listen to Joan's presentation and you have questions, don't hesitate to add your questions in the Q&A box as they come to you. We'll have plenty of time at the end of her presentation to go through your questions. Now I'd like to turn the webinar over to Catherine Sadler, our moderator for today. Catherine?
Thank you, Christine. I'm happy to introduce Joan Young as a featured presenter for today's webinar. Joan is recognized as one of Australia's leading social marketing researchers. She has dedicated her career to working with government and not-for-profit organizations to deliver better social outcomes. Joan recently joined the Behavior Change Collaborative to lead its research and evaluation functions. In this role, Joan provides an evidence base to inform behavior change strategies for government, nonprofits, and social enterprises in Australia and overseas. Previously, Joan was the CEO of Colmar Brunton Australia, where she established Colmar Brunton Social Research, one of the leading suppliers of social research. Joan regularly speaks at national and international conferences and is passionate about using behavioral insights to create a better world. We are very fortunate to have her share her experiences and insights with us in our webinar today. So with that, let's get started. Joan, over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm really thrilled to be here with you today. I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the things that I've learnt over the last 30 years of really applying best practice social marketing in Australia, New Zealand, and the Middle East. So I just want to start off by stating the obvious. We all know how hard it is to change behaviour, how hard it is to change our own behaviours and to influence others. But the great thing is that it is possible. And if we are aware of some of the leading theories and tools and frameworks, and we can apply those, we've got a much better chance of being able to develop strategies that are effective in influencing behaviour. So today is all about some tools and techniques and frameworks and examples of how to apply those in order to be more effective in what we're doing. So the reason that I was really drawn into this area of social marketing was I began life as a market researcher and was asked to do some research. I think the very first social marketing project that I was involved in was a child abuse prevention campaign. And the government agency at the time really wanted to reduce emotional abuse of children and neglect, but wasn't aware, I guess, of the theories. And this was 30 odd years ago. So we were very fortunate. We're able to find some great academics, Alan Andresen and Nancy Lee and others, and really bring some of those approaches to life in Australia and New Zealand. So for me, it all starts with understanding people, because if we want to be effective in influencing behaviour, we really need to understand the people whose behaviour we're seeking to influence. And more than that, we need to also really understand how they experience their world. Generally, people do things for a reason, and it's all about trying to understand that reason in the context of how they see their world and how they see their choices or lack of choices, as the case may be. But I guess the big lesson for me that's always a humbling experience is just how different people's perspectives can be, and how we can really get into trouble if we make assumptions about people feeling a certain way without actually really getting to know them and understand how they experience their world. So part of the challenge is that we need to get below the superficial and logical responses that we're most likely to elicit, particularly through surveys and through traditional market research type approaches. This is because people obviously want to sound sensible, want to sound logical, often do have rational reasons that they can provide for explaining why they do things or why they don't do things. And yet we know that beneath that logical response and those socio-normative responses, there may be other reasons that people are behaving in a certain way. So it's all about getting below the surface, beyond the words. We know how important getting beyond the words are, because we know that it's not as much about the words that we use when we communicate as the tone of our voice, our vocal clarity, the way we express ourselves, but also what we can see and what we feel through that communications. So facial expressions, the way we look, our eye contact, our posture, the touches and gestures that we might have. So it's the whole experience of the communication that sends the message rather than just the words. And this is, I guess, is a real thing to bear in mind when we're doing research in a COVID world, more and more remotely and virtually and online, is just how misleading it can be to rely on the written word, and how important it is to be able to see the people and the world that they live in, who we're trying to understand. We want to get below the surface because we really need to understand what really matters to our target audience, because we need to go beyond the obvious reasons for people that people will give us for doing specific behaviours, to really trying to get our head around all of the conscious and unconscious drivers of behaviour. So with things like understanding what values people have, what's really important to them, the kind of trade-offs they'll make in relation to costs and benefits around the current behaviour and the ideal behaviour that we're wanting to move towards. We need to really understand efficacy in terms of people's own ability or self-belief that they will be able to do the behaviours, the desired behaviours. We need to understand how they trust, or the social license that's associated with the organisation that we may work for or be working with. Because if people don't trust the messenger, don't believe that the organisation has their own best interests at heart, then it's much more unlikely that people are going to listen or want to get involved or getting engaged in the topic. Understanding norms and the pressure that people are under from the people around them and the culture that they live in and the society that they live in, and how that may impact on their behaviour, the context and settings in which the behaviour takes place, the heuristics, mental shortcuts that people, the way people process the experience and the way that they make decisions about what they'll do, and of course habits and routines, which can be very unconscious, that we're all probably very aware of the things that we do that we'd like to change, but it's just we're on automatic and we don't even think about necessarily doing something differently. So wanting to really unpack each of those possible components of reasons for the way that people behave, and trying to understand the role that each one of those could play in influencing new behaviours. And then also really looking at the levers for behaviour change, from wanting to control to control the behaviours, to creating products or designing services that could influence behaviour, incentivising behaviour change, enabling, supporting, communicating with our audiences. So this is just a framework that the Behaviour Change Collaborative has developed, but it's drawing on all of those best practice theories and frameworks that the social marketing discipline has been sharing for many decades now. So it's really important that we do take a step back before we begin a social marketing strategy, or before we, in our planning stages for the social marketing initiative that we want to work on, to really understand our audiences, to understand the people who we want to work with, and to not accept the rational, superficial responses that traditional research approaches might lead us to. The reason it's so important is because if we don't truly understand our audience and understand what motivates them and understand how to influence their behaviour, we can develop an approach that is very heavily based on what we think will work with that audience. So examples of those are negative consequence type communications, where we might want to target people who speed by telling them about the crashes and deaths and injuries that might occur, or people who drink about the kind of health impacts that could have, or people that smoke about the risk to them of needing open heart surgery, for example. So here what we're doing is trying to tell people that if they continue doing the negative behaviours that they're doing, there will be negative consequences. And we're doing this in the belief that if only people are aware of the negative consequences, then they may consider changing their behaviour. Now, we know that there's a long legacy in social marketing of taking this approach, and we know that it has had some positive impacts at some stages with some audiences, but my belief is firmly that it reaches a plateau stage where telling people and educating people is important, but it's not enough necessarily to get the continuing improvements in the behavioural outcomes that we're looking for. The other thing that we often do or fall into the trap of is playing on negative emotions. So creating anxiety, fear, or shame in our audience, believing that if we can make them feel those things, that they will then not want to continue doing the behaviour that we want them to change. And also blaming and shaming the people that we aim to influence. So what we have found through our research is this kind of strategy really does appeal to the majority who don't consider that they fall into these categories. So if we don't see ourselves as a sad loser or a bloody idiot or a mindless drunk, then we're quite happy with this type of communication. But if we are a heavy drinker or we are a risky drinker, this kind of communication really isn't inspiring us to change our behaviour in any way. What we need to do instead is uncover the human motivations that actually drive behaviour. We can use segmentation because we know that people are different, and even people who are sharing the same behaviour are probably doing so for very different reasons. So we can segment people geographically, demographically, psychographically, or behaviourally. All of these are valuable because they help us to better understand the people who we aim to influence. And what I'm proposing in this webinar today is that we consider a segmentation based on another layer of depth, and that is really around the human needs that will motivate action. So just some possible human needs. These are universal needs that usually do are relevant across whatever behaviours we're talking about, because they're fundamental need states of humans, all humans, to a greater or lesser extent. For a specific behaviour, they may differ. But generally, people are looking for a sense of meaning, for a sense of control. They may want status, they may want attention, they may want to feel safe, they may want to feel connected, they may want to feel that they're achieving something. So those kinds of motivations and needs, if we can really understand the role that they play in motivating the behaviour that we want to change, and then if we can understand the role they could play in influencing the behaviour that we want people to adopt, we can develop really powerful strategies and approaches that are benefits-based rather than deficit-based, and that are more effective in my experience. So the COM-B model is a useful theory. Again, probably something everyone's familiar with, but what I really like about it is it does focus our attention very much on ensuring that the strategies we develop give people the capability to be able to adopt new behaviour, the opportunity to adopt a new behaviour, and I say most importantly, the motivation to adopt that new behaviour. So we can use some really great theories. This one from Sutton, Bouch and Lefebvre around consumer-based health communication, where we can tie together the need to really understand our audiences and the people that we're wanting to influence, right through to the research, the strategy, the action and the evaluation. What I love about this model is that it talks about using research to really get inside the life experiences of the audiences that we're attempting to influence, really understanding their values, their beliefs, their desires, their needs and their behaviour, and in feeding that insight into both policy, regulation and programs, but also any messages or communication, ensuring those things work together to develop programs that will create action and that then can be evaluated. So using that kind of framework, we have found to be extremely useful. Motivational segmentation has a role to play here because it really can be applied to answer those message strategy questions that are part of that health consumer-based communications model. So to understand who is our target, what we're looking to do through motivational research is to understand the motivations that drive the current behaviour and then group people into motivational segments. In terms of the purpose, what we're talking about here is really being clear about what we want people to do. It's much more important to understand what we want people to do than it is to understand what we don't want people to do, because we're going to need to be aiming to influence a positive behaviour that is an alternative that can compete with the status quo behaviour that's creating the negative outcomes. So we need to really understand from the audience's perspective, what is the credible alternative behaviour, and it may be different depending on the motivations of the audience, because they're doing what they're doing at the moment for different reasons. So, for example, with smokers, there'll be people who smoke because they want to look cool. There'll be people that smoke because they want to fit in. There'll be people that smoke because they want to indulge themselves or give themselves a feeling of autonomy or independence, for example. Now, each one of those motivations may require a different set of strategies if we want to compete with those, compete with a new behaviour and deliver those benefits that people currently get from their existing behaviour. We need to be able to offer people benefits that will outweigh the barriers to encourage behaviour change. And again, those benefits are likely to differ by segment. We need to develop support that is gives each segment a reason to believe that they will receive the benefit if they undertake the new behaviour. And it needs to be credible in terms of the message, but also the support that we provide, so that people actually believe that if they do the behaviour, they will actually experience the benefit. We can use motivational research to identify the windows of opportunity when each segment is most open to the message, and the best way to reach them to maximise impact. And lastly, but not at all leastly, it's really important to understand the positive associations that will increase the behavioural appeal to each segment. And again, that could be very different depending on the segment. So I want to give you an example here. This example is from the ACT government in Australia. They had a huge challenge to try to increase the proportion of female firefighters from, I think it was about 3%, and they had a directive to get to 50-50. So in order to get there, they needed to increase the number of female firefighter applicants to be part of the training program. So taking this motivational segmentation approach, we conducted research with aspiring firefighters to understand the benefits that they were seeking from being a firefighter. We also spoke with existing firefighters, the 3% of the firefighters who were women, to ensure that the benefits that the aspirants identified were actually credible and could actually be delivered through the experience of becoming a female firefighter. This research identified 4 key motivations for being a female firefighter. One of them is the challenge seekers, so we're calling it a segment, but it was about people whose motivation is about the variety, being challenged, being their best self, I guess we could say. That was one set of motivations. Another was around wanting to help others. Another was around being ambitious and wanting to get ahead. And a fourth one was around the lifestyle of being, being paid to be fit, shift work, a lifestyle that suits some people and some families. Those were the 4 core motivations. Now, the communications that we show here is one execution, one poster that was aiming to tap into each of those 4 motivations. So you can see up here in the messaging, it was offering, if we are going to be a firefighter, we will be challenged every day for the challenge seekers, part of a team for the helpers, there to help for the helpers, and being who you want to be for the ambitious. And you can see with the images here, we've got an image of being part of a team, of helping others, of being challenged every day, and of being the sort of person that we want to be. So in one communication, it's possible to target the core motivations that could enhance the likelihood of people wanting to be a female firefighter. Now, I need to say that this strategy involved way more than just poster or a few pieces of communication. It also involved really understanding the experience of someone going through the process of considering whether to apply to be a female firefighter, and understanding at all the influences along the way, and at each point in the process where people can drop out and what we can do to keep them on that journey. So as a result of the research, the ACT government developed this piece of communication, but it also developed a CRM package to ensure that people were supported through every stage of the consideration and application process. And I'm very pleased to say this particular strategy resulted in a 500% increase in the number of female firefighters. So helped the organisation within a few months to be moving on along its journey to aiming to get to that 50-50. The other things that we can do that can really help us is to draw on best practice social marketing criteria when we're planning a strategy. And look, there are many different versions of this, and this is one that the Behaviour Change Collaborative has pulled together based on other many published frameworks that are out there. But what I want to do is just take you through how to apply each of these, how they've helped a specific campaign to change behaviour, so that you can see the sorts of frameworks and tools and approaches that may be helpful to you. And of course, the reason I've chosen it for this particular webinar is that it centres on using segmentation and targeting, and I'll be able to explain how we were able to do that for this specific program. So this example that I want to talk through was called Talking Families. It was presented at the World Social Marketing Conference a few years back by myself and our client, who was the Queensland Family and Children's Commission. So the first criteria is to have behavioural goals, and I cannot stress enough how important it is to be very, very clear about the overall outcome that we're seeking when we're developing a program or getting involved in a program. It's never too late to get clarity around our aims and objectives. So in this case, it was a matter of putting together a plan on a page, which started by asking all of the different stakeholders involved in the program, how are we going to define success? At the end of the day, if we are successful, what is going to be different? And for this particular program, the goal was to have more children at home safely with their family. The reason that this was set as the goal was that there was horrific levels of child abuse and neglect occurring in Queensland at the time. And unfortunately, the general response to the high levels of reporting of abuse and neglect tended to be removal of children from their families. And unfortunately, the outcomes for children that are removed from their families are often quite negative. Not that they wouldn't have been negative had they remained with their family, but the goal here was to create a strategy that would make it safe for children to be at home. So the next question is to look at, well, what would be required in order to achieve that success? And in this case, we're talking about parents getting help to keep children safe in the home. And so if we want parents to get help to keep children safe in the home, what we need to do then is answer question number 3, which is who needs to do what so that parents get help to keep children safe in the home. So question 3, the way that we chose to respond to that was to say, well, if families and communities could support parents more to keep their children safe in the home, then that would make a contribution, as would if parents would seek and accept help to keep their children safely in the home. So once we're clear on the behaviours that we want and we're clear on the audiences that we want, everything else falls into place because we already know the levers for behavioural change. The precursors to behaviour change are that people are aware of the desired behaviours, they're knowledgeable and educated about those behaviours, that they see those behaviours as relevant and desirable, that they believe that the benefits of those behaviours outweigh the costs. They have efficacy, that they believe they're able to do the behaviours, and if they do them, that they'll receive the benefits, and that they're positively influenced and supported by others to do those desired behaviours. And then once they do those behaviours, that they experience the promised benefits when the behaviour is actually undertaken. So we know the precursors that we need to put in place in order to achieve the behaviours that will create the foundations for the successful outcomes that we want. Question 5 is about, well, what mechanism are we going to create that will put the precursors in place? And question 6 is, okay, what do we already know about the kinds of mechanisms that have been used previously or elsewhere that might be applicable, that have been shown to be effective? What do we need to find out through primary research? Where are the gaps to really focus us in on what's it going to take to achieve these required behaviours in order to get the outcomes we want? So I thoroughly recommend the adoption of this kind of tool at the very earliest stages of being involved in any kind of behaviour change program, to tie in the research we do very much with the behaviours that we're seeking to influence and the outcomes that we're wanting to achieve. Also drawing on theory. So for this particular program, we, as with many programs, we based our work on the trans-theoretical model of behaviour change and an adaptation of it by Alan Andreessen, but also we have adapted it ourselves and created an extra stage, which is what we call the rejection stage, because what we find is no matter what behaviour we're looking at, if we segment people into behavioural stages, there's often a stage that isn't merely hasn't thought about the new behaviour, but has thought about it and has rejected it. So we have one group that we call rejection. So people in rejection, they may be community members that have thought about offering help to their family or their neighbours, but have decided against it because they believe that there may be a number of beliefs that cause them to reject it, but oftentimes they don't want to feel that they're being nosy or getting involved in someone else's business, being a busybody, or they have a fear of rejection. If they were to offer help, if someone didn't want their help, they would feel worse than they did before they offered it. So there may be a group of people in rejection. What we find when we have people in rejection is they're the hardest group to shift to trial and to adopt the new behaviour. So often it's a temptation to target people in rejection, but generally we would be often recommending that rather than that, we focus on people in contemplation. So these are people who actually are aware of the behaviours and actually would like to do them, but they just haven't done them. So it's about moving from the intention to the actual trial of the new behaviour. So if we're in contemplation, then it's all about promoting the benefits, reducing the costs, increasing the positive influence of others, and improving people's ability and efficacy. So I think I'd just thoroughly recommend looking at whatever models you're familiar with or that you can put your hands on, and use the theory that's out there and all of the applications of that theory that you can find to guide the research, but also to guide the project development, to work out who to target from a behavioural perspective, and then how to target them is where the motivational research comes in. We want to be insight driven when we're developing a social marketing campaign. If we want to be effective, it has to really begin and end with the community or the people who we're wanting to work with, that we're wanting to influence. So we start by listening to them. We might then develop a brief and pre-test our strategy, and refine it and implement it and evaluate it. But it's all about a constant backwards and forwards with the people who we're aiming to influence to ensure that we're on the right track. Now, in my experience, good, effective social marketing is always driven by a really thorough understanding of the needs and motivations of the audience, and good, effective strategies should always be tested with the audiences and refinements made in order to maximise their effectiveness before we spend a lot of money implementing something that doesn't work or that could have worked better. So in my experience, when we test ideas, concepts, program design, service design, if our audiences are telling us that it's not going to influence their behaviour, then we really do need to go back to the drawing board. And it's a question that should be asked at that pre-testing or piloting phase. And it can save us a lot of heartache rather than getting to the end of the process, evaluating something and finding out that it's had very, very little impact, if any. So another aspect of the planning criteria is to really understand the exchange. So this is what's going on in the mind of that person in the community when we're asking them to consider getting out of their comfort zone and offering help to a parent who they can see is stressed. So if we have a look at this, this is the example of what we call an exchange statement for a specific segment called the acknowledgement segment. So this is a segment of the community that are motivated to act because they want to be acknowledged as being a helpful, good person who's trying to help. So the way that this would work is the behaviour we want them to do is to offer people non-judgmental help at the first signs that they may be struggling to cope as a parent, instead of not offering help. And the benefit that we could promise them is that they will look like a good person to others, and they will have helped the children to be safe and the family to cope into the future. And then the support that we're offering is that I know I will look like a good person to others and help the children to be safe and the family to cope, because people like me who have offered help to family and friends at the first sign they're not coping are admired and appreciated by other parents and have made a positive difference to the lives of children. So this is trying to really unpack the exchange, the benefits we need to offer in order for people to that have to be sufficient to address the barriers that get in the way for this particular segment at the moment, in terms of stopping them from doing the behaviour that we want, which is offering help to the parents. So it's really important in this kind of exercise to address the competition. And the competition, when we're talking about social marketing, is very often the status quo behaviour. So our competition in this particular program was around all of the benefits of not offering to help parents. So for this particular group, who are really motivated by a desire to keep the children safe, the behaviour we want is for them to offer parents non-judgmental help at the first signs they might not be coping. The competition is instead of not offering the assistance. But the benefit we're offering here, the immediate personal benefit we're offering to the community who do the behaviour we want, which is to offer non-judgmental help, is that they will know that they've done the right thing and helped the family avoid a negative outcome. And they will know that the children will be safe and the family will cope into the future. So in this kind of scenario, we're very often looking for a feeling, a benefit, an emotion that we can promise that people will feel, because it needs to be immediate and it needs to be personal. We can't promise them that the outcomes for the family and the children will be the kind of happy family that we would all like them to be. But we can promise them that if they offer help, they will feel a positive benefit because they have actually done the right thing and tried to help. So that's the benefit for this particular group. And then the support for that behaviour is, I know that I will have done the right thing and helped the family avoid a negative outcome, and they will cope in the future because people like me who've offered help to the family at the first signs of not coping have made a positive difference to the lives of children and been appreciated by the parents. That was really important to them as well. So using segmentation and targeting is critical when we're developing a strategy to influence behaviour. And in this case, we're using a motivational segmentation approach. So we identified these core motivations for members of the community to get involved in the lives of others by offering them help or support when they can see that that parent needs it. So for some people, it was around the desire for a connection. They wanted to have a relationship with the person that they're offering help to and their family. That was their primary motivation. For others, it was around that sense of acknowledgement by others, so other people seeing them as being a good person. We talked about this belief that I might be making a difference and helping that family to be safer, and I know I've done the right thing. And there's another group of people for whom it's around being able to assist the family in a way that doesn't invade their privacy and can actually be done in a way that isn't seen as meddling in that family's situation. The privacy group were the hardest. It was primarily a motivation for not getting involved. So we had to develop quite specific strategies for each of these segments and then make a decision about which ones we were going to have the most traction with, because oftentimes we can't target all segments. We have to prioritise and we have to look at the benefits that we're most likely to be able to deliver, that are the most credible for the audience, that are going to get the biggest return on the investment we're making in the strategy. So we use our qualitative research to identify the segments. We use our quantitative research to size and profile the segments and to validate the segmentation process. Sorry, I'll just go back. The seventh criteria is around innovation. So I want to show you part of the strategy that was developed. This is one execution of a campaign. There were multiple executions targeting the different segments and targeting different demographics and genders, and people in different scenarios with different tools and behaviours that the community or parents could adopt, because we really wanted to model the desired behaviours, and there were multiple behaviours. There was no one single silver bullet. But the reason we consider this innovative is because one of the problems we have is parents and the community get a lot of messages and communications and programs targeting them. We needed to create a strategy that would actually cut through the noise that they're constantly being exposed to by both commercial and social marketers. And so I think you'll see from the creative that we try to use a technique that would grab the attention of participants.
The challenges of raising kids never stop coming. So when you see the pressure of parenting getting to someone you know, it's okay to offer help. One conversation could make the difference. For ideas on starting that conversation, visit talkingfamilies.qld.gov.au. Authorised by the Queensland Government, Brisbane.
Thank you. So I think you can notice there that what we're trying to do is model the desired behaviour, but also demonstrate the benefit to the community member who is offering help. We need to be able to show the emotional benefit that that person will get from doing the desired behaviour. And we need to be able to communicate that in a way that is credible to that audience. So collaboration is another key if we want to be effective, and this particular strategy involved multiple different government agencies apart from the Queensland Family and Children's Commission. It also involved child protection, education, police, health, communities, everybody supporting this message that asking for help is okay for parents, and giving the community permission to offer help, positioning it as a positive rather than as a negative, which it was tended to be seen as prior to this initiative. Mixed methods are critical, so it has to go beyond communication to actually offering support, programs, tools, toolkits, education, everything aiming to really support that message that we want to get through in order to influence the behaviour. You can see some different visuals here to demonstrate that. And meaningful evaluation. It's very easy to do evaluation that doesn't actually measure outcomes in terms of behavioural change. But in addition to knowing whether people are aware of the behaviour, what their attitudes are and how that's changed pre and post, building in a measure for people to be able to tell us about their behaviour prior to the initiative and then post the initiative, and devising the questions in a way that enables us to detect any changes is really critical. In this case, it was a 10% increase amongst people that had previously been doing the behaviour, but not consistently, to becoming consistent offers of help in the community. There were many other evaluation results, but that's the one that I've got time to share with you today. So a 10% shift in a small amount of time we were pleased with. Obviously, we'd like to have seen more, I hope that these kind of lessons will be taken on board and result in an increasingly effective strategy in this area across many different countries. So I want to leave you with this planning criterion set of principles. I think that if we can apply these principles to our work, we have a much better chance of creating effective behaviour change strategies, programs, communications. They apply across the board. It's certainly been my experience, and I hope that that's been useful for you. Thank you.
Joan, thank you so much for a great presentation. I do have a request that you share the link, and possibly we can share it in the chat, to the write-up of the case study. And if not,
Certainly, yes,
yeah,
yes.
if you will do that, that would be helpful. But while you are doing that, I'm going to request you multitask. I do have a few questions for you. Why do you think that organizations do not apply the kinds of approaches to understanding about how to influence people you have outlined? What gets in the way?
Well, there's multiple reasons, isn't there? I mean, a lot of organisations think they already know the people that they're trying to influence, and they do. They probably do have, a wealth of experience with those people. I think that what we can bring as social marketers, though, is a perhaps a different way of looking at people, which is really understanding that the drivers of behaviour go well beyond how someone might show up in a service interaction, or perhaps how the service providers have experienced those people, because we understand that there are a whole variety of drivers that can impact on that behaviour. And in my experience, there's always so much going on in the context and also below the surface that's impacting on people. And if we can just tap into that and get that clarity, then we can be more effective. Most people don't do it because they think they already know their audiences, and they seem to use research as a tick the box exercise rather than a deep dive into the hearts and minds and hands of the audience. And they also, if they do research, they don't necessarily have a behavioural lens on it. So they might ask great questions about the problem behaviour, but they don't necessarily then apply, the precursors that we know we need to understand if we want to influence, to change that behaviour. They don't necessarily use that kind of questioning technique. So despite having been going on about this for about 30 years now, I feel like there's still so much more that we need to do to really help organisations to be more effective.
Great. Thank you. Another question that kind of goes along that line, where we're seeking the evaluation. How was the evaluation carried out, and was there an issue with ecological validity?
Well, depending on the particular strategy, there are many different ways that evaluations can be carried out. Our preference is always generally to look at a pre and a post measure. And of course, there's a pre and a post self-reported behaviour and attitudes and awareness. You want to see a substantial shift in that pre and post strategy. If you don't see a substantial shift in that, then it's very unlikely that you've had any effect. I think it's a good indicator of success. But ideally, you've got some kind of secondary source that, like an observed behaviour change, or statistics, or some other way of being able to actually objectively measure whether that behaviour's occurred in the community. So for some of our campaigns, we know the number of people who applied to be a female firefighter increased by 500%. For that particular strategy, there was no pre and post survey conducted. There was only an outcome in terms of the number of people who enrolled. And for other work that I've done, we've looked at things like hospital admissions to see whether or not we are getting less hospital admissions when we're working on domestic violence strategy, for example. So I think what I would like to see is evaluations that measure behaviour rather than just how many people saw something or clicked on something or liked something. We need to be able to say that it had an impact on behaviour, not just awareness or attitudes.
So it's going back to both that quantitative and qualitative review.
Yes, I mean some behaviours there may not be common enough behaviour to be able to detect a change in the time span that we're wanting to evaluate. But what we're looking for then is to create a theory of change that would link up a whole set of indicators, so that we might not see a final behavioural outcome, but we might see positive signs that we're heading in the right direction. But I really, get very, very frustrated by the number of strategy evaluations that I see that only measure, cut through awareness or message recall or, attitude change, but not actually behaviour change. Yeah. But I know how difficult it can be to do that, and it does require us to think through that evaluation framework up front. Do one of those plans on a page to create a logic for your program so that you're thinking about evaluation from the very start. That would be my thoughts.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this question particularly goes to the child abuse campaign, but have you considered pre-testing the campaign with both sets of people, for instance, who are offering help and who are
Yes.
receiving help in order to
Yes.
avoid unintended consequences?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So it was pre-tested with both categories. That particular campaign that I shared with you was it was effective for the community, but not so effective for parents. And I think the reason my reflection on it is that particular campaign showed the community member as the proactive initiator of the engagement, and showed the benefits for that community member. So it followed best practice for the message around getting the community to change their behaviour. But if you think about it from the parent's perspective, what we did was we painted a parent not coping, showing her with cracks all over her hands and face, and then almost being a victim or being rescued. And I don't think that is a desirable message for parents on reflection. And I think that if we wanted to encourage parents to ask for help, then we should have been showing parents asking for help. So I think that's where we went wrong with that strategy, and that's only my personal opinion after post strategy.
Yeah. All right, we had this question last night. I wasn't sure which segment the person that wrote this question would be on, but it is this particular session. Are you familiar with critical consciousness raising, which was mainly developed by Andre Ferrere? And do you think its approach is related to motivational research for effective behavior change strategy?
I love the idea of increasing consciousness and increasing people's awareness of social issues and wicked problems. However, I have a great deal of concern about raising concern, anxiety, anger, frustration without providing solutions. And I do think that it's a trap that social marketing has fallen into for a long time, which is about raising awareness of the negative consequences of the status quo without necessarily looking at what the positive alternatives could be, and then enrolling those people in that vision so that they can see that it's relevant and desirable for them. And I think that raising awareness, increasing critical consciousness is probably part of the solution, but on its own, it may have unintended negative consequences of its own if it isn't channeled in a positive way to achieve change, in a positive change way.
Okay. We have another part of that question is CCR is all about action and solutions. And again, I think going with critical consciousness raising, it is a growing field of awareness. Do you have anything else to add to it?
I probably don't know enough about it. My only thoughts are, you know, we need to get focused on the behaviours we want, and we need to channel people towards positive outcomes. And I think we can spend a long time getting bogged down in the problem or the negative or the deficit. And so my suggestion is to be able to look at what's the alternative and how can we move towards that.
Right, right. So I do have a request that you share the write-up of the case study, the link for that.
Yes,
And you can share it in the chat. I don't know, Dave and Christine may be able to tell me if it can be shared otherwise later. And then somebody does applaud that that your response to the behavior of the parent needing help in the ad. So that was a good insight to
thank you.
learn from your evaluation. I'm done with questions. We are getting close to the end of our webinar, and I am going to turn this back over to Christine.
Great.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Joan. Joan, I think what we'll do is ask you to update your presentation with a link to that case study. And
Yes,
then
certainly.
we'll post that in the webinar archive so folks can access more information. And if you have another case study or information for folks to follow for the firefighter campaign, that would be helpful as
Yes,
well.
I will do that. Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Well, as we wrap up today, we would like your feedback. On screen are a few quick questions about the quality of today's webinar content. We depend on your answers for the development of future webinars, so please take a moment before you leave and share your feedback. In just a couple weeks, I'd like to share some news from ISMA. We will be opening registration for 3 social marketing training options. These are all online and range from a 3-session course to a 12-week course. Keep an eye on ISMA's social media. Again, if you are not already following us on social media, you can find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. So be sure to connect with us there. If you are not a member, that's a great way to stay updated if you think you'd be interested in taking social marketing training. Today's presentation was focused on social marketing research, and one of the 3 options will be on researching your audience. So there's certainly more opportunities for professional development there. All of the courses, the students who complete these courses will receive a professional certificate of completion. There'll be more information available on the website soon. Joan, thank you again for your wonderful insights and case studies. I just have to share quickly that as we did an ISMA member survey, I believe it was about a year ago, research and social marketing research was one of the top requests for more information and more guidance. So we are trying to deliver that via our webinars and professional development options. So we really appreciate your experience and insights in sharing those today. And thank you to our members and participants in today's webinar. Thanks for your continued support and participation. We hope to see you at a future webinar later this year. In the meantime, we encourage you to follow us. And if you're not a member, join ISMA and your regional association. With your membership, you'll have access to our webinar archive and discounts on social marketing, professional development, resources, and more. This is the International Social Marketing Association, and we now conclude today's webinar.